I am sorry, but there must be some mistake. My grandmother died 4 years ago. She committed suicide. I said those words into my phone, standing in my college apartment kitchen, absolutely certain that the woman calling had the wrong person. She was from a private psychiatric hospital in Pennsylvania, asking about unpaid bills for a patient named Sarah Bennett. My grandmother's name. My grandmother, who had been dead since I was 16 years old. Sir, I am looking at the file right now. Sarah Marie Bennett. Date of birth April 3rd, 1949. Emergency contact listed as Margaret Bennett, your mother. We have been trying to reach your family for 8 months about the outstanding balance. That is impossible. My grandmother killed herself when I was 16. I was at her funeral. I have her death certificate. She is buried at Greenwood Cemetery. There was a long, uncomfortable pause. When the woman spoke again, her voice was careful, confused. Mr. Bennett, your grandmother is not dead. She has been a patient at Riverside Psychiatric Care Center for over 4 years. She is in Building C, room 304. And according to our records, she asks about you constantly. Her grandson Tyler, she says you used to visit her every weekend. My legs went weak. I'd grabbed the counter to steady myself. This could not be real. This had to be identity theft, a scam, some terrible bureaucratic error. Because if it was not, if what this woman was saying was true, then my entire family had lied to me about something unspeakable. Let me start from the beginning. My name is Tyler Bennett. I am 20 years old, and I thought becoming an adult meant finally being old enough to make my own decisions. Instead, it meant being old enough to uncover the most horrific secret my family had ever kept. This is the story of how I discovered that my grandmother was alive, how my family had hidden her in a psychiatric facility and told everyone she had killed herself, and what happened when I finally learned the truth. I grew up in a suburb of Pittsburgh, in a nice neighborhood where everyone knew everyone, and appearances mattered more than anything else. My parents were Margaret and David Bennett. My father was a corporate lawyer at a prestigious firm. My mother was a family therapist with her own practice. Ironic, considering what they would eventually do. They were respected in the community, active in the church, the kind of people everyone assumed had perfect lives. My grandmother, Sarah Bennett, was my father's mother. She was one of the most important people in my life growing up. Some of my earliest memories involve her. She lived about 20 minutes from us, in a small house that smelled like vanilla and cinnamon. Every weekend, from the time I was maybe 5 years old until I was 16, I would spend Saturday afternoons at her house. My parents said it was so they could have couple time, but really I think they just wanted me out of the house. They were always busy, always working, always focused on their careers and their reputation. Grandma Sarah was the one who actually wanted to spend time with me. She would make me chocolate chip cookies from scratch, letting me help measure the ingredients and stir the batter. She always let me lick the spoon, even though my mother would have had a fit if she knew. We would sit at her kitchen table and eat warm cookies with cold milk, and she would ask me about school, my friends, my life. Actually ask, not the distracted half questions my parents threw at me between checking their phones. She taught me to play chess on a beautiful wooden set that had belonged to her own grandfather. She was patient with me as I learned, never getting frustrated when I made stupid moves, always showing me what I should have done instead. By the time I was 12, I could beat her about half the time, and she was genuinely proud of that. She had a garden in her backyard where she grew tomatoes and herbs and flowers. She would let me help, showing me how to pull weeds without disturbing the plants, how to tell when the tomatoes were ripe, how to deadhead the roses so they would bloom again. Those Saturday afternoons in the garden, the sun warm on our backs, the smell of basil and mint in the air, are some of my happiest memories. But the thing I remember most about Grandma, Sarah, was that she talked to me like I was a real person. Not a child to be managed, not a status symbol to be displayed, but an actual human being whose thoughts and feelings mattered. When I was struggling with something at school, she listened and gave me real advice. When I was excited about something, she shared my excitement instead of dismissing it. When I was sad, she let me be sad without trying to fix it immediately. She told me stories about my grandfather, who had died before I was born. They had been married for 40 years, high school sweethearts who had built a life together through good times and bad. She talked about him with such love, such longing, that I could feel how much she missed him even though I had never met him. When you find the right person, she told me once when I was maybe 14 and had just had my first heartbreak, it is worth all the risk. Your grandfather was my best friend. Losing him was the hardest thing I ever went through. But I would do it all again, every moment, just to have had that time with him. My grandfather died when I was 2, so I have no memories of him. But Grandma Sarah kept him alive through her stories. I knew about how they met at a school dance, how nervous he was to ask her out, how he proposed on a beach in Maine during a summer vacation. I knew about their tiny first apartment, about learning to parent together, about the business he built that allowed them to buy the house where she still lived. When he died of a heart attack at 68, suddenly and without warning, it devastated her. My parents told me she was never quite the same after, but she was still Grandma Sarah, still warm and loving and present in my life in a way my parents never were. Things started to change when I was about 15. Grandma Sarah started seeming different, sadder, more withdrawn. She still welcomed me for our Saturday visits, still made cookies and played chess, but there was something off, something darker lurking beneath the surface. She started talking more about my grandfather, how much she missed him, how hard it was to live without him, how sometimes she wondered what the point was of going on when he was gone. At the time, I thought she was just grieving, working through her loss in her own way. I tried to be supportive, tried to remind her that she had people who loved her, that her life still mattered. My parents noticed too, but their response was different. They started whispering to each other when I was around, stopping conversations when I entered rooms. They started making excuses for why I could not visit Grandma as often. They said she was tired, or not feeling well, or needed some space. I pushed back, said I wanted to see her anyway, but they were firm. 1 visit a month, they said. That was all. I hated it. I missed my grandmother, but I was 15 and had no real power to argue with them. The last time I saw her, I was 16. It was a Saturday in October, one of those perfect fall days when the air is crisp and the leaves are changing colors. I went to her house for our monthly visit, and she seemed more like herself than she had in months. She made cookies. We played chess. We sat in her garden, even though everything was dying back for winter. "I love you so much, Tyler," she said as I was leaving. She hugged me tighter than usual, held on longer. "You are such a good boy. Do not ever forget that." "I love you too, Grandma. I will see you next month." "Yes," she said, but something in her voice was strange. Next month. That was the last time I ever saw her alive, or so I thought. 2 weeks later, my parents sat me down in our living room. My mother was crying. My father looked grim. "Tyler, we have some terrible news. Your grandmother passed away last night." I felt the world tilt. What? How? What happened? My mother could barely speak through her tears. My father explained, his voice flat and clinical. "She took her own life. She had been struggling with depression since your grandfather died. We had been trying to get her help, but she refused. Yesterday, she made the decision to end her suffering." I could not breathe, could not think. My grandmother, my funny, warm, loving grandmother, had killed herself, had been in so much pain that she saw no other way out, and I had not known. I had not helped. I had not saved her. I should have seen it, I said, crying now. I should have known she was that bad. I should have done something. There was nothing you could have done, my father said. This was her choice. A terrible choice, but hers to make. I want to see her. Tyler, I do not think that is a good idea. The circumstances of her death were traumatic. You should remember her the way she was. But I insisted. I needed to see her. I needed to say goodbye. Finally, reluctantly, they agreed to take me to the morgue. I will never forget that room. Cold and sterile, smelling like chemicals and death. The body was on a table, covered with a white sheet. My father pulled back the sheet just enough to show her face. But her face was covered too with a cloth because of the trauma of how she died. You can touch her hand if you want, my mother said, to say goodbye. I took the cold hand that extended from under the sheet. It felt like my grandmother's hand. The same size, the same shape. I held it and cried and told her I was sorry. So sorry I had not been there. So sorry I had not known how much pain she was in. I love you, Grandma, I whispered. I will miss you forever. We had the funeral 3 days later. It was small, just family and a few of her friends from church. My parents had decided on a closed casket, they said, because of how she died. They said it would be more dignified this way, more respectful. I gave a eulogy, talking about Saturday afternoons and chess games and the best grandmother anyone could ask for. I cried through the whole thing. We buried her at Greenwood Cemetery in a plot next to my grandfather. I threw dirt on the casket. I watched them lower her into the ground. I said goodbye, and then I went back to my life. For 4 years, I carried the weight of her death. I blamed myself for not seeing the signs, for not being there when she needed me most. I visited her grave once a month, bringing flowers, usually daisies, because they were her favorite. I would sit on the grass and talk to her the way I used to talk to her in her garden. I would tell her about my life, about starting college, about the girl I was dating, about my classes and my friends, and all the things I wished I could share with her in person. I struggled with depression myself those first few years, saw a therapist, took medication for a while, worked through the guilt and the grief as best I could. My parents were supportive in their distant way, paying for therapy, but not actually talking to me about how I was feeling. That was fine. I was used to them being emotionally unavailable. I never suspected. Not once in 4 years did I suspect that anything was wrong. The death certificate looked official. The funeral had been real. The grave was real. How could any of it be anything other than what it seemed? And then, on a Tuesday afternoon in my junior year of college, my phone rang. Is this Tyler Bennett? Yes. Who is this? My name is Linda Marsh. I am the billing coordinator at Riverside Psychiatric Care Center in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. We have been trying to reach your family regarding some significant overdue payments. I think you have the wrong number. I do not have any family in a psychiatric facility. The patient is Sarah Marie Bennett, date of birth April 3rd, 1949. Her emergency contact is listed as Margaret Bennett, but that phone number has been disconnected for months. Your number was listed as a secondary contact. My grandmother's name, my grandmother's birthday, my mother's name. There must be some mistake. Sarah Bennett is my grandmother, but she died 4 years ago. Sir, I am looking at her file right now. She is very much alive. She is a long-term patient in our facility, and frankly, she should not be here anymore. Her condition has been stable for years. She has been asking to leave, asking to see her family, but we have not been able to reach anyone who can authorize her release. I sat down heavily on my couch. My hands were shaking. What do you mean she is alive? I was at her funeral. I identified her body. I have her death certificate. I do not know anything about that, sir. All I know is that she has been a patient here since November 2020. She was admitted by her son David and daughter-in-law Margaret for severe depression and suicidal ideation. She spent the first year in intensive inpatient care, and she has been in our extended care wing for the past 3 years. Her medication is stabilized. She attends therapy. She participates in activities. By all clinical measures, she is ready to transition to outpatient care. But she cannot be released without family authorization and a care plan, and no one from her family has returned our calls in 8 months. I need the address. I am coming there right now. Sir, it is a 6-hour drive from Pittsburgh. Visiting hours do not start until... I do not care. Give me the address. I am leaving right now. She gave me the address. I grabbed my keys and my wallet and walked out of my apartment without even stopping to think about what I was doing. My grandmother was alive. My grandmother, who I had mourned for 4 years, who I had visited at her grave every month, who I had blamed myself for not saving, was alive in a psychiatric hospital 6 hours away. And my parents had known the whole time. I made the drive in 5.5 hours, stopping only once for gas. My mind was racing the entire time, replaying every conversation I had ever had with my parents about Grandma Sarah, looking for clues that they had been lying. The closed casket, the covered face in the morgue, the insistence that I not spend too much time grieving, that I move on with my life. It all made terrible, horrifying sense now. I arrived at Riverside Psychiatric Care Center just after 8 at night. It was a sprawling complex on the outskirts of Harrisburg. Modern buildings surrounded by manicured lawns and high fences. It looked expensive. It looked like the kind of place that charged thousands of dollars a month. I walked into the main building, where a receptionist sat at a desk behind security glass. I am here to see Sarah Bennett, room 304 in Building C. Visiting hours ended at 7. You will need to come back tomorrow. I just drove 6 hours to get here. I just found out that my grandmother, who I thought was dead for 4 years, is actually a patient here. I am not leaving until I see her. The receptionist stared at me. I must have looked unhinged, wild-eyed and desperate, still wearing the clothes I had thrown on that afternoon. But something in my voice must have convinced her, because she picked up a phone and made a call. 20 minutes later, a doctor appeared. Her name tag identified her as Dr. Patricia Cole, Chief of Psychiatry. She was a woman in her late 50s, with gray hair and a professional but kind demeanor. Mr. Bennett, I am Dr. Cole. I oversee Sarah's care. I understand there has been some confusion about her status. Confusion? I thought my grandmother committed suicide 4 years ago. I was at her funeral, and now I find out she has been here the whole time? That is not confusion. That is something much worse. Dr. Cole nodded slowly. Why do you not come with me to my office? We need to talk about what happened. I followed her through security doors and down a long hallway to a comfortable office with diplomas on the walls and family photos on the desk. She gestured for me to sit. When was the last time you saw your grandmother, Tyler? October 2020, 2 weeks before she supposedly died. I went to her house, like I did every month. She seemed fine, better than she had been in a while, actually. And when did your parents tell you she had passed away? About 2 weeks after that visit. They said she killed herself. They took me to identify the body. Dr. Cole's expression was carefully neutral, but I could see concern in her eyes. Tyler, I need to be very honest with you. Your grandmother was admitted here on November 12th, 2020, by your parents. The admission paperwork states that she had attempted suicide, that she was a danger to herself, and that she required intensive psychiatric care. Did she actually attempt suicide? When she arrived, she was heavily sedated. Over the next few weeks, as the medications cleared her system, We were able to assess her properly. She was deeply depressed. Yes, the loss of her husband had affected her severely, but by her own account, she had never actually attempted to take her life. She said she had been feeling suicidal, had expressed those feelings to her family, and that your parents had decided she needed professional help. So they committed her. With her consent, initially, she signed voluntary admission papers, but those papers gave your parents medical power of attorney while she was a patient here. They have used that power to keep her here for 4 years, despite multiple recommendations from our clinical staff that she is ready to be discharged. Why would they do that? Why would they tell everyone she was dead and then just leave her here? I do not know. That is a question only they can answer. What I can tell you is that your grandmother is not, and has never been, severely mentally ill. She had a major depressive episode following your grandfather's death. With medication and therapy, she has made excellent progress. For the past 3 years, she has been maintained on a low dose of antidepressants and weekly therapy sessions. She participates in art therapy, attends group activities, and has formed friendships with other patients. She is stable, functional, and absolutely capable of living independently or in a supervised community setting. Then why is she still here? Because your parents have refused to authorize her release, and because the bills have not been paid in 8 months, which raises questions about their ability or willingness to continue her care. We have been trying to reach them to discuss transition planning, but all of their contact numbers have been disconnected. That is why we called you. I want to see her. Right now. Dr. Cole nodded. I think that is a very good idea, but I need to prepare you. She believes her family abandoned her. She has no idea that you were told she was dead. She thinks you made a conscious choice not to visit her for 4 years. That knowledge has been extremely painful for her. She asked about me? Constantly, especially in the first 2 years. She would ask the staff if anyone had called, if anyone was coming to visit. She talked about you all the time, about your Saturday visits, your chess games, her garden. She was absolutely heartbroken that you never came. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. She thought I abandoned her. Yes, and I need you to understand that before you see her, she may be angry, she may be confused, she may not believe you when you tell her what happened. I do not care. I need to see her. I need to tell her the truth. Dr. Cole led me through more security doors, down more hallways, to a different building. Building C was quieter than the main facility, more like a dormitory than a hospital. The rooms had actual doors, not just curtains. There were common areas with televisions and bookshelves and comfortable furniture. We stopped at room 304. Dr. Cole knocked gently. Sarah, it is Dr. Cole. There is someone here to see you. I am not expecting anyone. A voice said from inside. My grandmother's voice. Older, more tired, but unmistakably hers. I know, but I think you will want to see this person. Dr. Cole opened the door and stepped aside, letting me enter first. The room was small but comfortable. A single bed with a colorful quilt, a desk with books and art supplies, a window overlooking the lawn, and sitting in a chair by the window, a book in her lap, was my grandmother. She was older than I remembered. For years had added lines to her face, gray to her hair. She was thinner, frilier, but her eyes were the same. Those warm brown eyes that had looked at me with love my entire childhood. She stared at me for a long moment, not moving, not speaking. I could see her trying to process what she was seeing, trying to understand if I was real or some kind of hallucination. Grandma! My voice cracked. Grandma, it is me. It is Tyler. Her book fell from her lap. Her hands started shaking. Tyler! It came out as a whisper, disbelieving. No, you are not real. I imagine you all the time, but you are never real. I am real, Grandma. I am here. I came as soon as I found out. Found out what? You have known where I was for 4 years. You just never came. I crossed the room and knelt in front of her chair, taking her hands in mine. They were cold and thin, trembling with emotion or medication or both. Grandma, I need you to listen to me. I did not know you were here. I thought you were dead. Mom and Dad told me you committed suicide 4 years ago. They took me to identify a body. We had a funeral. I have been visiting your grave every month for 4 years. I did not know. I swear to you, I did not know. She stared at me, tears starting to stream down her face. What are you saying? That is not possible. That does not make sense. I know it does not make sense, but it is the truth. I got a phone call today from the billing office here. That was the first time I found out you were alive. I got in my car and drove straight here. I would have come sooner. I would have come every day if I had known. She was sobbing now, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. I held her hands and let her cry, crying myself, trying to process the magnitude of what my parents had done. They had not just hidden my grandmother away. They had staged her death. They had let me grieve for someone who was alive. They had let her believe her grandson had abandoned her. The cruelty of it was almost incomprehensible. I missed you so much, she finally managed to say. I waited and waited for you to visit. I asked the nurses every day if you had called. I thought maybe you were angry at me. I thought maybe I had done something wrong. I could not understand why you stopped loving me. I never stopped loving you. Not for a single day. I have been to your grave every single month. I have been sitting on the grass talking to you, telling you about my life, missing you so much it hurt. And you were here the whole time, alive, wondering why I did not come. We held each other for a long time, crying together, trying to make sense of something that made no sense at all. Dr. Cole had quietly left the room, giving us privacy for this reunion that should never have had to happen. When we finally pulled apart, I sat on the edge of her bed and took her hands again. She looked at me like she was afraid I might disappear if she looked away. Tell me everything, I said. Tell me what happened. How did you end up here? She took a shaky breath and began to speak. After your grandfather died, I was so sad, so lost. He had been my partner for 40 years, and suddenly he was gone. I tried to keep going, tried to keep up with my life and my garden and our Saturday visits. But it was so hard. Some days I did not want to get out of bed. Some days I thought about how easy it would be to just stop, to be with him again. Did you ever actually try to hurt yourself? No, but I talked about it. To your parents, to my doctor. I said I was having thoughts about not wanting to be here anymore. Your parents got very upset. They said I needed help. They said they were worried about me. They took me to a doctor who prescribed medication. But I did not like how it made me feel, so I stopped taking it. What happened then? Your parents came to my house one day. They said they had found a wonderful treatment facility where I could get intensive help for my depression. They said it would just be for a few weeks, just until I was feeling better. They made it sound like a spa, like a nice place where I could rest and heal. I trusted them. They were my family, so I agreed to go. And they brought you here. They brought me here. At first, it was okay. The doctors were kind. The therapy helped. I started to feel a little better, but then weeks turned into months. I asked when I could go home, and they said not yet. I asked to call you, to see you, and they said you were busy with school, that it would be better if I focused on my treatment. I believed them at first, but then months turned into a year, and you never visited. Your parents stopped visiting too, and I started to realize that maybe I was not here just for treatment. Maybe I was here because they wanted me here. You have been here for 4 years. 4 years. The first year was the hardest. I was on so much medication that everything felt foggy. I could barely think straight. But Gradually, they reduced my doses, and I started to feel more like myself again. I have been telling them for 3 years now that I am ready to leave, that I want to go home. But they say I cannot leave without family authorization, and my family has disappeared. Did you know Mom and Dad had told everyone you were dead? No. How could I know that? I am locked in here. I have no phone, no computer, no way to contact the outside world except through the staff. And when I asked the staff to help me reach you or your parents, they said the phone numbers were disconnected. I thought you had all moved away and forgotten about me. I felt rage building in my chest, hot and choking. My parents had done this, had taken my grandmother, a woman who was sad but not crazy, and locked her away, had told me she was dead so I would stop asking questions, had staged an elaborate fake funeral so I would never know the truth, and they had left her here for 4 years, paying thousands of dollars to keep her locked up, until finally they stopped paying altogether and the hospital had to track me down. Why would they do this? I asked. Why would anyone do something so horrible? Grandma, Sarah looked at me with sad, knowing eyes. Because I was embarrassing. Because having a mother with depression, a mother who talked about suicide, that is not good for your father's reputation. He is a lawyer. Your mother is a therapist. How would it look if people knew that David Bennett could not even keep his own mother from falling apart? Better to make me disappear. Better to tell a tragic story about suicide than to admit the truth. That their mother was human, that she had struggles. Exactly. Your parents care very much about how things look, about being perfect, about having everyone think they have it all together. I was a problem that did not fit into that perfect image, so they removed me. I spent the rest of that night in my grandmother's room, just talking, catching up on 4 years of lost time. She told me about life in the facility, about the other patients who had become her friends, about the art therapy classes where she had discovered she loved to paint. She showed me watercolors she had created, beautiful landscapes, and flowers that captured something essential about her spirit. I told her about my life since she died, about starting college, about my classes in psychology, because I wanted to help people the way I wished I had been able to help her, about the girl I had been dating for 2 years, Anna, who I wanted her to meet, about the depression I had struggled with after losing her, how guilty I had felt for not preventing her suicide. You should not have had to carry that guilt, she said, taking my hand. None of this was your fault. None of this was my fault. This was your parents' doing. All of it. As the sun came up, I knew what I had to do. I called a lawyer. Her name was Elizabeth Morrison, and she specialized in elder law and medical malpractice. When I told her my story, she did not even hesitate. What your parents did is called false imprisonment. It is also elder abuse, fraud, and possibly identity fraud, depending on how they staged the death. We can get your grandmother out of that facility today, and then we can make sure your parents face consequences. It took 3 days to get all the paperwork in order, but by Friday afternoon, I was driving my grandmother out of the parking lot at Riverside Psychiatric Care Center. She sat in my passenger seat crying, looking out the window at the world she had not seen in 4 years, at trees and buildings and other cars on the road. Where am I going? She asked. My house is gone. Your parents sold it years ago. You are coming home with me. I have a 2-bedroom apartment. You can stay as long as you need to while we figure things out. She lived with me for 6 months while the legal case unfolded. During that time, I watched her slowly come back to life. She started cooking again, filling my apartment with the smell of her famous chocolate chip cookies. She found a small community garden near my building and rented a plot, spending her afternoons tending tomatoes and herbs. She met Anna, my girlfriend, and they bonded immediately over their shared love of terrible reality TV shows. She also started therapy with a new therapist who actually listened to her, who helped her process the trauma of what had happened. Because being locked away for 4 years by your own family is traumatic, even if the facility itself was not abusive. The legal case against my parents was straightforward but devastating. Elizabeth Morrison, my attorney, filed civil charges for false imprisonment, elder abuse, financial exploitation, and fraud. She also contacted the Pennsylvania State Police and the FBI, since the fake death certificate crossed state lines and involved federal crimes. The evidence was overwhelming. Riverside Psychiatric Care Center had documentation of everything. The admission papers signed under duress, the medical power of attorney that my parents had used to keep Grandma trapped, years of treatment records, multiple recommendations for discharge that my parents had repeatedly blocked. Dr. Cole provided testimony about how my grandmother had been inappropriately detained for years beyond what was medically necessary. The billing records alone told a damning story. My parents had paid over $200,000 in the first 3 years to keep my grandmother locked up in that facility. $200,000 to hide her away from the world. They had only stopped paying 8 months ago, which was what had finally led to the phone call that exposed their secret. Elizabeth dug deeper into their finances and found more disturbing evidence. My grandmother's house had been sold 2 months after she was institutionalized for $350,000. That money had gone directly into my parents' accounts. My grandmother's pension and Social Security benefits, totaling about $4,200 a month, had been redirected to my father through the medical power of attorney. Her savings account, which had held nearly $90,000, had been drained completely. Over 4 years, my parents had stolen or redirected approximately $600,000 that should have belonged to my grandmother. They had used that money to renovate their house, buy new cars, take vacations to Europe. They had lived well off my grandmother's assets, while keeping her locked in a psychiatric facility against her will. The fake funeral added another layer to the crime. Elizabeth tracked down the funeral home that had performed the service, a small operation in a neighboring county that specialized in budget funerals. The director remembered my parents. They had paid cash for a closed casket service, claiming it was for religious reasons. There had never been a body. The casket they buried was empty except for some weighted materials to make it feel authentic. The death certificate was even more complicated. Forensic document analysis showed it was a sophisticated forgery, created using stolen hospital stationery and authentic-looking seals. The medical examiner, whose signature appeared on the document, had never seen my grandmother's case. Someone, possibly an accomplice working in the county records office, had created the false documentation and filed it in the system. The FBI was investigating that angle separately, trying to figure out who had helped my parents fake an official death. The body I had identified at the morgue turned out to be exactly what my lawyer had suspected, a medical training dummy. The morgue that my parents had taken me to was actually a private facility used for funeral director training. My parents had paid the owner to let us into a room with a covered dummy, telling him it was part of a grief counseling exercise. I had never actually seen a face. I had just touched a cold hand and believed what my parents told me. The cruelty of that moment still haunts me. They had taken their 16-year-old son to identify a fake body, had watched me cry over a dummy, had let me believe I was saying goodbye to my grandmother. What kind of people do that? What kind of moral bankruptcy allows someone to stage that kind of trauma for their own child? As the case built, more people came forward with information. Grandma Sarah's former neighbors testified that my parents had told them Sarah had moved to Florida to be near her sister. When the neighbors had asked for contact information, my parents had said Sarah wanted privacy during her transition. The church community where my grandmother had been active was told she had died of a heart attack, and the family wanted a private burial. My parents had created different stories for different audiences, carefully managing the narrative so no one would ask too many questions. My father's law partners testified that he had taken a sudden interest in elder care law and medical power of attorney cases about 6 months before my grandmother's death. He had researched involuntary commitment procedures, patient rights in psychiatric facilities, and the legal requirements for declaring someone dead. He had been planning this for months, maybe longer. My mother's therapy practice provided its own evidence. She had searched her professional databases for information on long-term psychiatric care facilities, specifically looking for places that were remote, expensive, and discreet. She had researched medication protocols for depression, apparently trying to understand how to keep my grandmother sedated and compliant. She had used her professional knowledge, her understanding of mental health systems, to trap her own mother-in-law. The prosecution built a timeline that was chilling in its premeditation. My parents had not acted impulsively. They had planned this for at least 6 months before executing it. They had researched facilities, found accomplices, created false documentation, and staged an elaborate fake death. This was not a desperate act by overwhelmed caregivers. This was calculated, deliberate, and evil. The trial began on a cold Monday in February, almost 9 months after I had found my grandmother alive. The courthouse was packed. The media had picked up the story, and it had become a sensation. Fake suicide hid years of imprisonment. Read one headline: Parents staged death to hide elderly mother. Read another: My parents' faces were everywhere, their reputations destroyed by the very scandal they had tried to avoid. My father's defense was that he had been acting in my grandmother's best medical interest. His lawyers argued that Sarah Bennett had been severely depressed, potentially suicidal, and that placing her in intensive psychiatric care had saved her life. They claimed the fake death was a misguided but well-intentioned attempt to spare the family pain and protect my grandmother's privacy. My mother's defense was slightly different. Her lawyers portrayed her as a victim of my father's manipulation, someone who had gone along with his plan out of misplaced loyalty. They argued that she had been uncomfortable with the deception but had felt powerless to stop it. Neither defense was credible given the evidence. Dr. Cole destroyed the best medical interest argument by explaining, in precise clinical terms, why my grandmother had not required 4 years of inpatient psychiatric care. She testified that Sarah Bennett's initial depression had responded well to treatment within the first 3 months, that she had been stable and appropriate for discharge within a year, and that keeping her institutionalized beyond that point had been medically unnecessary and psychologically harmful. Mrs. Bennett was a widow experiencing normal, if severe, grief, Dr. Cole explained to the jury. With appropriate medication and therapy, which we provided, she made excellent progress. By every clinical measure, she was ready for outpatient care within 12 months. Keeping her detained for 3 additional years served no therapeutic purpose. It was simply warehousing a human being who had become inconvenient to her family. I testified for almost an entire day. The prosecution walked me through my childhood relationship with my grandmother, the Saturday visits, the way she had been more of a parent to me than my actual parents. I described the last time I saw her, how she had seemed almost like her old self, how she had hugged me tight and told me she loved me. Then I had to relive the moment my parents told me she was dead. The prosecutor asked me to describe every detail. My mother's tears, my father's clinical tone, the way they had taken me to identify a fake body. I had to explain what it was like to give a eulogy for someone who was not dead, to throw dirt on an empty casket, to spend 4 years visiting a grave that held nothing but lies. How did you feel during those 4 years? The prosecutor asked. Guilty, I said, and my voice broke. I felt guilty every single day. I thought I had failed her. I thought if I had just paid more attention, If I had just been a better grandson, maybe she would not have killed herself. I blamed myself for not saving her, and she was alive the whole time, locked in a hospital, thinking I had abandoned her. My parents let me carry that guilt for 4 years. They watched me suffer and said nothing. Several jurors were crying. So was my grandmother, sitting in the front row of the gallery with my girlfriend, Anna, beside her. The defense tried to paint me as a vengeful grandson who was exaggerating for effect, but it did not work. My therapist from those years testified about the depression I had struggled with, the survivor's guilt that had nearly destroyed me. My college roommate testified about finding me crying at my desk, looking at photos of my grandmother, talking about how much I missed her. The florist near Greenwood Cemetery testified that I had come in every month, without fail, to buy daisies for my grandmother's grave. My grandmother's testimony was the most powerful. She sat in the witness box in a blue dress, her hands folded in her lap, and described 4 years of abandonment with heartbreaking clarity. She talked about asking the staff every day if anyone had called, if anyone was coming to visit. She talked about how hope had slowly drained away as months turned into years and no one came. She talked about the artwork she had created in art therapy, paintings of her garden and her house and her grandson Tyler, trying to hold on to memories that were fading. I thought Tyler had moved on with his life and forgotten about me, she said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. I thought my own grandson, who I had loved more than anything, had decided I was not worth visiting. That was worse than any depression I had ever experienced. Worse than losing my husband, losing Tyler, thinking he had abandoned me. That broke something in me that I am not sure will ever fully heal. The defense lawyers tried to cross-examine her, tried to suggest that her memory was unreliable because of the medications she had been on, but Dr. Cole had already established that my grandmother's cognitive function was excellent. She remembered everything with perfect clarity, every day of waiting, every false hope, every moment of believing she had been forgotten. The financial expert testimony was damning. A forensic accountant walked the jury through every dollar my parents had stolen or redirected. $600,000 over 4 years. He showed them the luxury vacation receipts, the new car purchases, the home renovation invoices. He showed them that my parents had been living far beyond their legitimate income, funding their lifestyle with money they had stolen from a woman they had locked away. Did the defendants need this money? The prosecutor asked. No, the expert replied. Their combined income was substantial. They could have maintained their lifestyle comfortably without touching Mrs. Bennett's assets. They took the money because they could, because they had control, because no one was watching. The defense called character witnesses, colleagues of my father who testified to his professionalism, members of my mother's church who talked about her charitable work. But it rang hollow against the evidence of what they had actually done. You can be a respected lawyer during the day and still lock your mother away and fake her death. You can volunteer at church on Sundays and still spend your mother-in-law's pension on European vacations. In his closing argument, the prosecutor addressed the jury directly. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about the most fundamental betrayal of trust imaginable. These defendants did not just steal money. They stole years. They stole a grandmother from her grandson, and a grandson from his grandmother. They made a 16-year-old boy believe he had failed to save someone he loved. They made a grieving widow believe her family had abandoned her. They did all of this deliberately, calculatedly, with full knowledge of the pain they were causing. And they did it for money, for convenience, for reputation. The question before you is simple. Do we, as a society, allow people to throw away their inconvenient elderly relatives? Do we allow families to stage deaths and fake funerals and lock away human beings who have done nothing wrong? I trust you will answer that question with a resounding no, The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they returned, the forewoman read the verdicts with a clear, firm voice. Guilty, 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 on every single count. Elder abuse, false imprisonment, fraud, financial exploitation, conspiracy, everything we had charged them with. My father's face went white, then red. He started to stand up, to protest, but the bailiffs moved in immediately. My mother just sat there, staring at nothing, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. Sentencing came 3 weeks later. The judge was a woman in her 60s who had clearly been moved by my grandmother's testimony. She looked at my parents with undisguised contempt as she delivered her remarks. "I have been on the bench for 23 years, she said. "I have seen terrible things in that time. Murders, assaults, unthinkable acts of violence. But I am not sure I have ever seen anything quite as cruel as what you two did. You did not just commit crimes. You committed profound moral violations. You took a vulnerable woman who trusted you and turned her into a prisoner. You took a young man who loved his grandmother and forced him to mourn her while she was still alive. You staged an elaborate deception that required planning, resources, and the participation of multiple people. And you did it all to avoid embarrassment, to maintain your perfect image." She sentenced my father to 6 years in prison. My mother received 3 years as an accomplice, though the judge made clear she believed my mother was more culpable than the defense had suggested. They were also ordered to pay full restitution, the $200,000 owed to Riverside, plus damages to my grandmother for the 4 years of false imprisonment, plus my legal fees. The total came to nearly $570,000. "I would give Mrs. Bennett every penny you have if I could," the judge said. "Unfortunately, I am bound by the law. But know this, you will spend every remaining day of your lives paying for what you did, and you will do so knowing that your son and your mother will never forgive you. That is the real sentence here, not the prison time, not the money, but the knowledge that you destroyed your own family for something as meaningless as reputation." My parents were led away in handcuffs. I did not watch them go. I was holding my grandmother's hand, and that was all that mattered. The aftermath was complicated. My parents had to liquidate everything to pay what they owed. The house I grew up in, with 4 generations of family history, was sold at auction. I could not afford to buy it, and honestly, I did not want it. There were too many bad memories now, too much betrayal soaked into those walls. The cars were sold. The retirement accounts were drained. The vacation property they had bought with my grandmother's stolen money was seized. Everything went to paying back what they owed, and even then it was not enough. My father will be making payments from prison wages for years. My mother will be working off her debt long after she is released. They write to me, sometimes from prison. My father's letters are full of justifications. He is still trying to explain it all away, still trying to make me understand the impossible position they were in, the difficult decisions they had to make. He never apologizes. Not really. He just explains, as if explanation could somehow erase what they did. My mother's letters are different. She apologizes over and over, begging for forgiveness, promising that things would be different if she had another chance. But her apologies feel empty. If she was really sorry, she would have stopped it 4 years ago. She would have told me the truth. She would have done something, anything, to prevent the cruelty she participated in. I do not respond to either of them. Neither does my grandmother. Some betrayals are too deep, too fundamental, too destructive to ever heal. They did not just lie to us. They staged an elaborate, expensive, years-long deception that caused immeasurable pain. That is not something you apologize away. That is something you live with forever. But from that wreckage, something good has emerged. My grandmother and I have built a new life together, one based on honesty and trust, and the knowledge that we will never abandon each other again. She lives with me in a 2-bedroom apartment that feels more like home than any place I have ever lived. She has her own space, decorated with her watercolor paintings and photos of my grandfather. She has her garden plot at the community center and her therapy sessions and her growing circle of friends. She is thriving in ways I never imagined possible for someone who went through what she did. She volunteers at a crisis hotline for seniors who are being abused by their families. She speaks at conferences about psychiatric patient rights. She has turned her pain into purpose, using her experience to help others who might be trapped in similar situations. I changed my career path because of what happened. I graduated with a degree in psychology, and now I work at a nonprofit called Patient Advocacy Alliance. We fight for the rights of people in psychiatric facilities. We investigate complaints of abuse and improper detention. We help families navigate the complex world of involuntary commitment. My grandmother's case is not unique. There are hundreds, maybe thousands, of elderly people locked away in facilities because their families find them inconvenient. I speak at conferences too, telling our story, educating people about the warning signs of elder abuse. I talk about how to spot financial exploitation, how to make sure your elderly relatives are truly being cared for and not just warehoused. I show people my grandmother's empty grave, the death certificate that was a lie, the 4 years of receipts from a florist where I bought flowers for someone who was not dead. Every time I tell the story, people are shocked. They cannot believe families do these things, but they do, more often than anyone wants to admit. Last month, my grandmother and I went back to Greenwood Cemetery, to the plot where I used to visit her empty grave. We brought flowers, but not for her. We brought them for my grandfather, whose grave is real, and who I wish could have seen his wife freed from the prison my parents created. We stood there together, her hand in mine, and she talked to him the way I used to talk to her ghost. "I made it through, James," she said, using my grandfather's name. "It was hard, harder than losing you, but Tyler found me. Your grandson found me and brought me home. You would be so proud of the man he has become. I know I am." I squeezed her hand, unable to speak through my tears. "Thank you for coming back for me," she said as we walked to the car. "You saved my life, not from depression, but from something worse, from being forgotten, from being thrown away. You showed me that I mattered, that I was worth fighting for. You are worth everything, Grandma. You always were. Your parents did not think so. Then they were wrong. About you, about me, about what family means. You taught me what real family looks like. You taught me that you show up, that you fight, that you do not abandon people when they become inconvenient." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I am glad you learned that from me instead of them. I am glad you are nothing like them. I will never be like them. I promise you that. And I have kept that promise. Every day, in every choice I make, I try to be the opposite of what my parents were. Where they prioritized image, I prioritize truth. Where they saw inconvenient problems to be hidden away, I see human beings deserving of dignity. Where they chose cruelty, I choose compassion. My grandmother is 75 now. The 4 years she lost will never come back. The time we could have had together, the conversations and the chess games, and the simple joy of being family, all of that is gone forever. But we have now. We have the future, however long or short it may be. And we have the knowledge that we survived something that should have destroyed us. That we found each other again despite everything my parents did to keep us apart. That love, real love, is stronger than lies. I am Tyler Bennett. I was 20 years old when I discovered my grandmother was alive after believing she had killed herself 4 years earlier. I drove 6 hours through the night to find her. I fought to free her from the prison my parents created. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure she never feels forgotten or abandoned again. Because that is what family does. Real family, the kind that actually shows up. Thank you for listening to my story of growing up faster than I ever wanted to. I have left 2 more stories on your screen, both from young men who learned that sometimes becoming an adult does not happen at 18. It happens the moment your family needs you to be strong. Click on whichever one speaks to you. And if you want to join our community of people who understand what it is like to be forced to grow up overnight, that notification bell is waiting. Until tomorrow, remember, age is just a number, but courage defines who you really are.